Excuse me for a minute. Somebody's put something in that suitcase. Which means that I don't have to do this. No comb, no watch, little luggage. On the 20th of last month, we packed our bags, getting ready to leave for our trip to Italy. On that Sunday morning, after the service was over, we quickly changed clothes to head to the airport to supposedly get on a 2 o'clock flight, which turned out to be a 4 o'clock something flight because they were late. And in between of switching and hurrying up to get to the airport supposedly on time, I forgot to get my comb out of my pocket to switch to my pants that I was putting on. When we finally got to Rome the next day, about 3 hours late because there was a problem with flights and other such things, we got to our hotel and I looked at the watch that I had taken with me because I didn't want to take my nice watch that the church gave me some years ago. So I had gone to some store and put in a $2 battery and was going to wear that cheap watch. And I looked at my watch and then I looked at my phone and it was a totally different time. And I'm talking about just minutes, but every hour it was catching on the 12 o'clock. And it just clicked there, it just stayed there, and I knock it and it'd move, and then anyway. So the next day whenever we left Rome, I just left my watch there on the counter because it was no good at all. And here's the luggage, except for what's in this heavy thing that we took. This was mine. 3 pairs of shoes this size. Two. I wore one, and there were 2 others in these 2 things here. Yes, I did have some other things in there as well, clothes and other such things. Unfortunately, the weather reports were incorrect, and instead of it being 50s and 70s, it was more like 60 and 90s. So therefore, the 2 pairs of knee-length shorts I wore came in quite handy and got used quite often. And the long pants that I had, a couple of those never even got put on. My wife, I think, was totally surprised that I could pack in that. This was our carry-on. And wherever we went, we didn't have to worry about, getting our checked luggage. It was all in here, except whatever's in this box, this heavy suitcase right this second. Which reminds me of how much stuff that you and I have. We learned that less was more. That it was very easy, in fact it was easier to have less stuff on the trip than it was to have more stuff on the trip. One morning, I guess the 3rd morning after we had started traveling around the different places in Italy, we got on the elevator and we had our suitcases that both looked like this, and then there was a man hauling one that was probably twice, it was this size, one big suitcase, and it was filled to the brim. And my wife looked at me and said, "That's one big suitcase." And I thought, yeah, that sure is. And I wonder all the stuff that they have in there. We live in a world, and we live particularly in a country, where contentment is probably not the top 10 of what people would say about their life. Because we live in a world today where so many people want and think that they have to have more. Now, I'm just as bad as you. And when I asked this question, or when I typed this question up for the lesson this morning a few weeks ago, I thought, yeah, I've got stuff in my garage that hasn't been moved in a year, and probably 2, and maybe even 3. And when it comes to attics and basements and other such things, I've not been to your house, and you probably have been to mine, but yet we all have stuff in there that we wonder why we even got them in the first place. Let me ask you, why did Paul say that godliness with contentment is great gain if many times we don't practice and believe that by what we say and by what we do and by what we have? I want you to turn to 1 Timothy chapter 6 this evening, and I want us to look at some things that we need to think about when indeed it is the case that less is more. That passage, 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 6, but godliness with contentment is great gain. Have you ever thought about what Paul's suitcase must have looked like when he traveled? Now, I'm being facetious. I don't know what they had. But can you imagine all the places that he traveled? All the different seaports that he came to, all the different cities that he came to. Wonder what Paul took with him. And why would God tell Paul to write to us almost 2,000 years later on in the affluent society in which you and I live in and say, godliness with contentment? That is, being content as well as being godly is what it's all about. How's that possible? How is it possible to become more content? The first thing we've got to do is we've got to look at as to this world from God's perspective. Look at the text. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we carry nothing out. And we all know how we came into this world. Regardless of how young or old we are, most of us understand how we came to this world. But notice the certainty of what Paul says. It's a fact that you're not going to carry anything out. Yes, we've all heard about the guy in Texas that was buried in his Rolls Royce or Cadillac or whatever it was. You know, we've all heard of people that they put things in their casket or wherever they are in regard to things that they're buried with. But the point of the matter is it doesn't go with them out into the world in which God's planned for eternity. Why is it that we forget to understand that everything in this world is just temporal? Now, if we were immortal in this world, if somehow God said, no, it's in this world, you're going to stay. You're not going to go to an afterlife. You're not going to go to heaven or to hell. You're going to stay right here. It would at least make a little more sense from our perspective, would it not, for us to have a little more stuff? Because after all, I've got to have it for a long, 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 long time. But that's not the case, is it? Because Paul says everything about this world is just transitory. It's temporary. It's something that you're not going to take to the other life. In fact, Paul says it this way: the one thing you take to the afterlife is the one thing that so many people today mistreat and abuse and are not even concerned about. That soul that God gave us at the very beginning of time. But if we understand this world more, would it not help us better to understand what we do and what we don't do with things in this world? But secondly, we need to know when enough's enough. And I realize for some of us that enough almost never is enough when it comes to the things that we have. If you've come to my office in years past, you know that I typically have some kind of memorabilia in there. It's not there anymore. I didn't get rid of it, but I just decided to put it aside and put it somewhere else. Because ultimately, after a while, it's going to be given to somebody else anyway, for the most part. Enough's enough. Having food and raiment or clothing, these things, we shall be content. Now, ladies, you may not have all the clothes in your closet that you like, but you got clothes there. And men, the same way. And you may not have every kind of food or delicacy that you'd like to have, but we probably every one of us have something we could eat tonight if we wanted to or needed to. And if not, then we've got a food pantry for those kind of things. With these things, we shall be content. Think about when you started out as a young adult, regardless of whether you were married or not married. I just remembered when we were married how it was. You know, we didn't have a house budget. This was before Dave Ramsey. We were just two kids in love, ready to get married and wanting to get married, and we both had jobs that paid whatever they paid. But whatever we had to take into our first house, you remember how proud you were of those things? How excited you were to get those things? I'm going to just do an informal survey here. Raise your hand if in your first house or your first apartment or wherever it was, you had things in your house or in your apartment that you had that were used. Kids, you look around this. Can you imagine used things in someone's house? Used things in someone's apartment? I remember calling Bonnie one day. I got so excited. Our neighbors 2 doors up had taken their couch and they had stripped it, and it was just a frame, and they had put it on the side of the road. I called her. I said, "You want it?" She said, "Yeah, we need it." "Yeah, get it." It was the ugliest thing in the world, but we were so excited, and she made real nice. She redid the covers for it, and it matched the decor of our supposed house we had. And when people were to come sit on our couch, you know, I mean, we were so proud of that couch that our neighbors had thrown out because they were sick and tired of it, and they probably had it for 20 years. But you remember how proud you were of that? I didn't ask this question. How many of you how many of you had used beds? And no, I don't want to answer. Don't answer that question. But you know, probably a lot of us did. Yeah, because you know, how many of you carried those heavy, terrible sofas that made out into a bed and they weighed 1.5 tons, but yet you drug it from whoever's house or grandma's house, but you brought it into your house because it was now yours. Question: when we had those things, weren't we content and weren't we happy? Because we knew we could not afford anything better at that point in time than what we had, but it was ours. That was the important thing. And therefore we were just happy as a lark because it was in our house and we were starting all out together. My question is, what changed? What changed about all those used things? The Bible tells us that wealth ultimately the desire for wealth never changes. Doug read Luke chapter 12, verse 15, in the midst of a parable that Jesus was talking about, a man that wanted to have everything and just take care of himself. Beware of covetousness, greed, the desire for more things. For a man's life does not consist of the things that he possesses. The wish I had more. Think about it. People today are buying things that they don't want or they don't really need just because they feel like they got to have them. They're trying to keep up with whoever else around them or whoever their friends are. Enough's enough. That's what Paul was saying. If you got food and if you got clothing, folks, that's what contentment is. But then also, and I asked that question for us to really seriously think about, do we really deserve what we have anyway? Like many of you, the church had showers for us, and we got wonderful gifts. Things that just, would blow your mind in regard to kindness and generosity and whatever. And we all realized then, we didn't deserve all that, but it was so nice to have. And we do the same today in regard to showers or anniversaries or graduations, and rightly so. But ultimately, are all those things really ours in the first place, or are we just stewards of them? You see, Paul is saying, look at the world, and then secondly, realize where contentment should be. But then thirdly, you've got to ask the question, what is really most important? He says this, those who desire to be rich, notice, they fall into temptation and the snare, into many foolish and harmful lusts, which draw men in destruction and perdition. Now notice, it's the desire to be rich. And folks, the point of the matter is, you can desire to be rich if you got $1 in your bank account or if you have $1 million or somewhere in between. It's not how much you have, it's the way and what you're trying to decide that's most important. That's what he's trying to say there in that passage. The desire to be rich. Well, what are the consequences? Destruction and a snare, which drown men into destruction, which drown men, foolish and harmful lust, which drown men into destruction and perdition. You see, ultimately in life, we got to decide who's most important. And if the answer is me, myself, and I, or us and our family and everything that we want and everything that we desire, then guess what? Get ready, because the end result of that, ruin and destruction. That's what Paul says. And again, it's not a dollar matter that matters. It's not whether it's $1 or whether you add 4 or 5 zeros to that. It's your desire for riches. It's your desire for things. It's your desire for prosperity in this world. That's the point that Paul's making. If that's all you're looking for, if that's all you're living for, if that's all you're dying for, that's the end result. So we have to ask the question, what is most important? We also need to get our love aimed at something that's worthwhile. Look at the text. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, of which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. The love of money. You've heard it before. We either love people and then take things that we can get and use them to bless the people that we love, or just the opposite. We allow the things to dictate what we're all about in life, and we use people. And you probably know today of people that you can name. Maybe people that used to worship here, maybe people that are your neighbors, maybe people in your own family. That instead of loving people and then using things to bless those people's lives, it's just the opposite. It's the things that they want. It's the money that they desire. It's the job and the better career, and on it goes. Simply because they can have. And by doing so, they just use the people that they use to get where they want to get. Remember in the parable, that's why Jesus said what he said about that rich man. Is because his own desire, the only thing he lived for was self. So we've got a choice to make in life. Where are you aiming your love? Where are you centered in regard to the things that you're going to do? What direction are you going to go with? And by doing so, you got to decide who you're going to focus on. You see, the one that made us is the one that deserves everything that we have. Again, lest we forget, we're only stewards of what we have. It doesn't belong to us. It ultimately belongs to God. He's just going to ask for an accounting of it at the end of time. Wouldn't it make sense for our love for Him be greater than our love for money and anything else that's in this world? We also need to understand that somewhere in life you make a decision where you're going to run. But you, oh man of God, we often don't connect this verse to this context, but I think it fits. Flee these things. Flee what? The love of money. Flee the idea of covetousness. Flee the idea of trying to get more and more and more every single day. Flee those things. And instead of, you pursue righteousness and godliness and faith and love and patience and gentleness. In other words, Paul was saying, run away from those things. Now, you're saying, but I've got to take care of my family. We all know that. And we can quote 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, he that does not take care of his own is worse than an infidel. We understand that passage. There's nothing dishonest or dishonorable about working and about wanting to better ourselves and wanting to have things. There's nothing wrong with that at all. So please don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. Or even worse, drive by my house and look at all the stuff I have. That's not the point I'm making. Paul says, instead of this being the one thing that you key in on for the rest of your life, run toward these things that are right and well and the way God wants it to be. Because at the end of life, if you're on the right path, you're going to stay there if you keep on the right path. But if we allow things in life, if we allow baggage to get in our way, that's going to be a problem. Now, I hadn't planned to do this because I don't know what's in this thing, but this would weight you down, whatever it is. I can't hardly pick it up. But there's a passage about that, and see, this is light. If you don't think it is, let me show you this. One finger. There's nothing in there that's going to weight you down. Whatever's in there will weight you down. And Paul said in Hebrews chapter 12, or the writer said in Hebrews chapter 12, 1 and 2 and 3, whatever there is in life, don't let it ensnare you and weight you down. Why? Because ultimately in life, you've got to make a decision. Am I going to travel light in this world because I'm sending everything that's most important up there? or am I going to allow my stuff to get in my way of living the Christian life that I ought to live? I really had my doubt that I could go to Italy with those two things. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you, my shorts smelled so bad they walked back home from Italy. They really did. They were rough. But we were able to get it in there. And Bonnie's was even, she had space. It made me even madder. But I, big feet, big clothes, whatever. But in life, and in what's most important, who are you going to follow? And what are you going to do? Because Jesus reminded us that the most important thing in all the world is what many people forget about following. And that's he asked that rhetorical question, what will a man give in exchange for his soul? What are you giving in exchange for your soul today? And I hope the answer is really easy to say, nothing. But if it's something that's weighing you down, if it is something that's keeping you from being all that God wants you to be and that others likely need you to be, then perhaps you, like the lady this morning, need to respond and say, I need to change that. I need to ask for forgiveness. I need to be a better person. As we sing the invitation song, you need to respond, come together as we